Okay, we're back. If you're listening to this on your podcast app, if you're watching it on YouTube, be aware that there is a icebreaker episode before this, which is, in Ben's case, is about 25 minutes long, where we started on questions that were submitted by subscribers. We started going through those questions, a Q&A with Ben. We didn't get through them all. We're going to carry on with those questions throughout this podcast. However, my recommendation is that you go back to that icebreaker episode. So in your podcast app or on YouTube, it is the previous one to this in the playlist. Go back there, listen to those, and then leave it flick over into this episode. You can, of course, do your own thing and tell me to F off. If you want to do your own thing, then just carry on listening or watching what you're doing now. Either way, you're going to enjoy this. And it is my pleasure, Ben Griffin, to have you back onto H Hour. Is it your pleasure too?
Yes, very much so. I've been waiting to come back on for the last 6 years.
I'm joking. In all seriousness, you know, you mentioned it on the icebreaker. I hadn't actually realised until this morning that you haven't spoken publicly since we last spoke, which was 6 years ago. You've gone into retirement somewhat since then, in terms of retirement on your activist and public speaking side. So in deadly serious, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it, mate.
Problem,
I'm glad we can get it
problem.
sorted. Thank you for putting up with my badgering for the last almost 6 years. That episode that we did then, one of the most popular episodes that has been listened to on the podcast, and you are the main guest who I frequently get asked to have back on. Now, I don't know if that's because we clashed a little bit on the first episode.
Did we though? I can't even remember clashing.
I listened to it back. Last week. We did clash a little bit, but it definitely wasn't as much as I thought. I think what happened in my own perspective is the way I remembered it is clashing more. And I think because I definitely got frustrated with some of the stuff you were saying. I think afterwards, because of that perception of, or that feeling of frustrated with what you were saying, I think afterwards I remembered it being more heated than what it was. As if I was being more like actively defensive of things.
Right.
Which wasn't the case when I listened back to the podcast.
No, because obviously over the years I've done all sorts of interviews and that, and it definitely didn't sort of flash up as one of the more aggressive ones, you know, like in terms of the lines of questioning and the sort of the back and forth. So yeah, I thought it was pretty mellow, really. But
what's been going on the last 6 years, mate?
Not much. So, like you said, I'm pretty much retired. I might have. I don't think I have. Someone can obviously check up on this, but I'm pretty sure I haven't spoken in public since that podcast. I might have spoken
not knowingly.
Yeah, or not with any great intention, you know, like maybe spoke at a meeting if someone's asked me to speak at or something, you know, like just because I happen to be there or something like that. But no, I'm pretty sure I haven't spoken in public or been on any sort of media or anything for about 6 years.
You haven't. However, you did introduce me to some cracking guests.
Oh.
So obviously Adnan, I had on.
Yeah,
I've had Adnan on once. He's coming on again. Adnan Salah, what a dude. In fact, we met that when we recorded that episode. You and I, we met him afterwards in the pub.
Yeah, because he lived not far from the studio.
Other person I had on was a lady whose name is Yael Zur, the Israeli lady, who you will know by a different name.
Yes.
I had her on as well. That was that was a amazing insight into Israel IDF stuff back then, before what was going on now, you know.
Yeah.
So thank you for those. What's it been like taking a step back from, in inverted commas, activism and chilling? Did it feel like a part of your soul was ripped away? Because you said you were doing it for 14 years on the icebreaker. You mentioned that.
Yeah. It was just the right time to stop. You know, things have a sort of, things have a natural cycle, a natural life cycle. And that activism and campaigning, you know, almost like being on operations all those years, came to an end. So it just felt entirely natural. It was a natural thing. It came to its end at the right time, and strangely enough, COVID started pretty much as I retired, and changed a lot of things anyway, you know, like on a personal level for all of us, I think, you know, like, so that's sort of, that made a real break in things, because I retired as an active member of Veterans for Peace in sort of like November 2019, if I remember. I think that was about right, November 2019. And then obviously that COVID stuff started from then almost. I think it was like
March 2020
we
was the
started
first
to hear about
lockdown
it at the
UK,
end of in December, I think.
November,
you know, like
December, yeah.
around the world. And then obviously within a few months everything was closed down. So that kind of put a break in there between the activism and what happened afterwards in itself. And even if I hadn't retired, that would have put a break in there. So obviously other things come into play that that are part of the experience that we have around things. And obviously that must have played a big part in it, in terms of it feeling like there was a big, you know, like there was a break from that.
Do you miss it?
No. That's the thing in life. I don't miss anything. You know, like, you name it, I don't miss it. And that's not in some callous way. It's just that for me, those things are still there. They're still there in the background, or you know, I don't feel like there's something that's been lost. You know, but certain things belong in a certain place, or certain things belong, some people would say, in a certain time. You know, in a certain moment in our life, and those things, that's where they're supposed to be, in that part of our life. So all of those things, the activism, you know, the countless things that went on during those years, they belong there, and they can't be missed from my perspective. But also not regretted either. You know, like
Has your worldview changed since then? Is there anything that you wholeheartedly believed, or a core part of your activism, that you've fundamentally changed your view or thoughts since then?
That might be tricky to unpick, right? That might be tricky to unpick. I'm not sure it's about a worldview that's changed. Like I say, all of the things that happened, you know, like, let's just say from leaving the army in 2005 to retiring from Veterans for Peace in 2019, those all make perfect sense. You know, like, there's nothing in there that's sort of like an anomaly, or that I'm somehow don't now believe in, as it were. But I'm not involved, you know, I'm not involved on a day-to-day basis in campaigning. You know, that's what it is, campaigning. You know, actively campaigning.
Yeah. Yeah. It can take a lot of time being an activist, right? I interviewed someone a while back. I can't remember his name, but he described himself as an activist, as in that was his role. And it made me think about people who, they're activists for the wrong reason. They're activists because it's the only way they feel like they are contributing to the world. And it's not about the thing they're being an activist about, be that racial equality, be that foreign policy, foreign military policy, be that another thing. I think there's a lot of people like that these days. It's almost like it's they think it's like a cool in-crowd vocation to undertake, without actually giving a shit about what they've been activists about. I think a lot of people aren't like that, but a lot of people are like that, I think, now. And that's highlighted in And that's highlighted in when you ask people why they believe what they believe, or why they think what they think, or why they're campaigning about the companion, and they can't give their own actual decent answer, describe exactly why they think what they think, because they don't know why they think what they think. They're just parroting what someone else says, which is a shame, because a lot of the time they're representing something which absolutely should be fought for. You know, I think that's the case. What do you think? I'm going to ask you about Ukraine. I'm going to ask you about Ukraine. I'm just warning you off. I know, mate. I know. I'm going to do it, though. I'm going to do it.
Do you know what, though? I've got a friend, a good friend. And
don't avoid the question.
No, I'm not. But I'm just to sort of like bring this in. Yeah, we went to primary school together, infant school and primary school together. And she often says to me, "Oh, Ben, do you remember when this happened? Ben, do you remember when that happened?" I'm like, no, I can't. I can't remember any of this. "Oh, do you remember Mr. So-and-so, you know, teacher we had in third year of infant school?"
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
It's anyway, yeah, we'll go into it, but you know, it's anyway, yeah. I'm often surprised at how well people remember certain things, you know, so specifically.
What about what you said or in the past?
No, about their own lives. You know, like yeah. I don't have that sort of recall, you know.
I do about certain things.
Right.
Depends on certain things.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose it's everyone, right? Whatever sticks in your mind about whatever makes you tick different ways, I suppose. Anyway, Ukraine. Anyway, right. Also, we've got a bunch of the questions we're going to get around to on this as well, which are more about SF, Afghan, Iraq, stuff like that. However, Ukraine. What do you think about the situation in Ukraine and the West's involvement with it? Do you think we should be involved there or not?
I think, well, that it would be in Britain's best interests, given the geopolitical uncertainty that we face from all angles, that Britain become a neutral country. That's my take on it. No alliances with anyone, no foreign interventions at all, that we become a neutral country.
How do you define alliances, though? Because you have
well, NATO is an alliance.
Okay, you mean like a military alliance?
Military alliances. Yeah, that's my. To put it simply, I think now is actually an advantageous time. This isn't, you know, like I come at it from a certain angle, but I could see how this would also be palatable to people from different perspectives than mine, that we become a neutral country. That's my take on it. So you can extrapolate from that what I think of Ukraine or all sorts of geopolitical questions. I think that is the ideal position that Britain should adopt.
If that is beneficial, the most beneficial position we could adopt, why do you think we're not doing it?
A whole load of reasons, you know, from vested interests just to habit, culture. I don't think it's been properly argued for. I don't. It's easily dismissed on a whole load of different arguments. But you know, that's my take on it, and that's where I think we should go. So
you mentioned that,
but I'm not that sort of attached to the idea that I'm going to start campaigning for that. That's just my sort of take on it. You know,
you mentioned the icebreaker. Actually, you touched on something there about habit and culture, and you mentioned in the icebreaker about it is a policy. It is British culture, and it is the British way of doing things. I'm gonna try and paraphrase or describe what you're insinuating. British way of doing things is that we see military intervention, military action as one of the first or one of the main go-to actions, initiatives we can take to bring about whatever end we want.
Yes.
Right? I'm not sure that's true over the last 20, 25 years. I am inclined to think that if the USA, if we didn't have this special relationship with the USA over the last however long it's been, if that didn't exist, let's say 80s, 90s, and we were left to our own devices, yeah, certainly Great War on Terror, certainly since 2000, I find it hard to imagine that we would have gotten ourselves involved in all of the campaigns that we got ourselves involved with. I am inclined to think that we only did that because we were in the pocket, and still are, of the USA.
I mean, that we are in the pocket of the United States plays a part, but that's not the only part. You know, I think Britain is the, you know, and I'm a bit rusty on this because, like I say, I retired in 2019. But, you know, we're the fifth, we have the fifth largest military budget in the world.
What Britain does?
Yeah. Google it. That's what I'm sure I read that, but we'd definitely be in the top 10. But I'm pretty sure I read the other day that we've got the fifth.
Okay.
In terms of expenditure, and you have to include the expenditure on nuclear weapons in that. So that often gets missed.
But that's not an indicator that we would be proactive, the protagonists in military intervention.
It's not difficult. We only need to look back over the last 300 years. We are the probably most prolific. What would be the right use of words? You know, like, you'll have to correct me on the use of words, but the most prolifically deployed military over the last 300 years.
Yeah, but you're including there, though. You're including their British Empire time, right?
Yeah, all of it.
But modern day, what have we decided to do ourselves apart from faults?
But it's a bit easy, isn't it? To say another way of looking at it would be to say that we're opportunists. I'm not saying this is the case, but I'm just saying another way of looking at opportunist, and that with the Americans are helping to facilitate our appetite for these things by providing the logistic and intelligence support for these things. And you know, we could go round and round with this one, I think.
I don't know, mate. I don't look at the period between. Well, look at the period since World War II, right? How much were we involved with since World War II?
Plenty.
How much were we involved with from 2000?
Plenty.
And what were the motivations for each? Well, from World War II onwards, what are we?
If we look at the number of deployments, you know, I don't think we'd find much of a difference. If we were to compare Britain to a country with a similar sized economy, we would be way out there in terms of our military deployments.
I think that's because of our connection to the USA, though. I think that's because of our connection to the USA.
I think that might be the case. You know, that might be the case, but it's still a fact.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see what it proves.
No, that we are prolific military users.
Yeah. What I'm trying to say is, I want to think it's their fault, not ours.
Right? Yeah. No. You know, that's fine. But how different are we? You know, like when you compare us culturally and historically. Obviously, America has had many people immigrate there over the years. You know, over the last 2 centuries. So their makeup is different to ours, but there's a huge crossover there of you know, people of British origin in America, in positions of power in America. You know, so it's not like we're completely separate. You know, like we're of similar origin. You know, shared origin.
Yeah, yeah. It's difficult to try and work out what would be the case if certain circumstances didn't exist, right? And we were talking off air. Like, my perception of things has definitely changed, and my opinion of things has changed in such a big way since we last spoke. I think coming more in line with, you know, a lot of the way you were thinking at the time, or a lot of the way you think. And I remember actually. Who did you introduce me to? Phil. when
Oh
Phil
yeah,
took over
Philip
VFP, and
Clark.
Phil
Yeah.
and I clashed a lot we did clash a lot. I haven't listened to that one, but we clashed a lot. But it was mainly because I thought he would dance around questions. I thought, I'm recalling this, and that was maybe like 5 years ago. I may be wrong. Sorry, Phil, if I'm misrepresenting that interview. But I remember at the time I was advocating, as I recall, I was advocating for, yes, interventionist foreign policy is often a good thing.
You were saying that intervention
Is often a good thing. And
right? Okay, yeah.
I think may have even been saying it's a necessity.
Okay.
Now, I can see how it, like my thoughts now are, I can see how it could be in extremis. But by and large, I tend to think now that interventionist foreign policy is a really poor tactic. I think it's a really poor way to do things, and it certainly doesn't serve for stability at home, which should be the primary concern, I think, regardless. I think that most of the stuff we've been involved with over the last 25 years overseas was to no benefit at home here in the UK,
And definitely to no benefit of the
country
occupiers.
we were in,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of time was completely misrepresented in the reasons for which we were involved and how we were involved there.
Would you say that? Do you think that any lessons have actually been learnt from our interventions in Afghanistan? Libya is one that's always left off the table, and Iraq. I think what's happened is that those wars have come to an end, or those, whatever they were, military interventions have come to an end, and have just been, hidden in the cupboard, thrown in the dusty old cupboard. Right?
Yeah,
Don't open
I
that
don't
door.
think so.
I don't think we've learned anything from those things.
No, I agree, but I do think that I think the ability for those kind of nonsense interventions to be got away with, so to speak, is becoming harder for governments to do. And because I think the discourse online is just, it's been crazy how things have developed since the last time we spoke. People are just wanting to poke holes in everything, find the truth behind everything, expose the actual information about why we're doing this, that, or whatever. The financial connections between people, the political connections between people who otherwise on the face of it shouldn't be connected at all, and that exposes things like private corporate involvement in military intervention and the huge gross rewards that reaps already very rich people at the expense of very poor people quite often. I think it's getting harder for them to get away with that, which is a positive thing. And even in retrospect, you can't hide. It's very difficult for them to hide. They can't hide what's happened to those countries that we've been in and done over in the name of good, and the position they're in now. Like you're saying, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, man, fucking joke. Iraq, what a joke. Libya, what a joke. Another place. There's a bunch of other places.
And for me as well, it's looking back, it was such a wasted opportunity. So, don't know if you remember back to it, but obviously the end of the Cold War. Okay, you had the sort of the conflicts in Yugoslavia, the sort of what happened in Yugoslavia, which I don't really know enough about in terms of what was behind all that and what was happening and who were the driving forces behind that. But there really was a chance there to start the 21st century in a completely different way.
Why do you think it went wrong? Because what you're talking about here, a lot of people pinpoint as one of the start points for how we've ended up in the situation we are now with Ukraine, Russia. They will indicate that it was the start point of, so there was an opportunity to improve relations between the East and the West, between Russia and the West mainly, and that agreements were made, promises were made, and And by and large, it was the West and it was the USA that started reneging on those promises to, at the time, Russia, the
Yeah.
broken Soviet.
I mean, I think in a much bigger way, it was a missed opportunity. The start of the 21st century, in a symbolic way, it was a fantastic moment in time, wasn't it? The start of a new millennium. That doesn't come around very often, obviously.
Yeah.
I vaguely remember there was a campaign at the time to cancel third world debt at the start, like to cancel debt moving into the new millennium, which would have been a fantastic thing. I just think there are missed opportunities, and we fell into Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, more Afghanistan, Syria, and on it goes. And yeah, I think that was a missed opportunity for doing things in a different way. Like when you win something at anything, you can be humble in victory, can't you? You can be humble in victory and reach out the hand to the vanquished, as it were. To be a lot more generous as the victor. And for whatever reason, that's not what happened, is it? That's not what we did. I'm talking about the end of the Cold War and everything that went on in the 90s into the late 90s. From a British perspective, it didn't help that the government of the time got a sort of taste for military intervention in two very benign operations, one in Kosovo and one in Sierra Leone.
Do you think that's when it was?
No, as in,
okay.
I'm not pinning too much on that, but what I'm saying is our government, which was still there in 2001, had two very benign experiences, military experiences, where they deployed troops and it all went well in Kosovo and Sierra Leone. No great casualties, no real civilian deaths. Also, they got away with the bombing of Belgrade. Was that 1998? And there wasn't much of a backlash against that in terms of what had happened. Yeah. So anyway, I think it was a missed opportunity, but we are where we are, and this is the route that that we went down. Like what can we do?
I mean, one of the things I think I try and think about how the heck it's the sort of, I'll say, the military industrial complex. I use how it ran away with itself and just developed the way it did over the last 20 odd years. And the most simple way, I think, because you can go and do all the conspiracy theories you want in the world, from how and why 9/11 happened to what happened afterwards, what happened before. But I think the very simple way, my gut feeling is that like 9/11 happened, and then it was like hell hath no fury, like an American bald eagle scorned, and they went crazy and to enact judgment on wherever they think they could, and Osama and Afghanistan and all the rest of it went down. And I think in that initial couple of years, I think that the people the people behind the corporations who can influence government the most significantly, I think that they realized how easy it was to make a shed load of money if they can convince the public that an intervention in a country is absolutely necessary for the good of people at home, for keeping the UK or the USA or any other country safe and well. I think they realized that, and then from 2002, 2003 onwards, maybe they just bankrolled it. Not bankrolled it, they just it just went into a snowball effect. We'll go here, we'll go here, we'll go here, we'll go here, and a lot of situations were blown out of proportion or completely misrepresented because they wanted to get public consent behind sending the military somewhere to do military things to make a lot of money. That is the simplest explanation I can see for it, because I can't see it. I can't see any honest reason why the last 25 years has happened. Honest, decent reasons why, because of the outcomes. You know, the state we left Iraq, the state we left Afghanistan, the state we left Libya. Syria is a slightly different kettle of fish. But if there had been any ounce of actual decent intent with those places, we wouldn't have left them in the state they were, and we wouldn't have done things in the way we did them.
We wouldn't have gone there.
I mean, we probably wouldn't have gone there. Yeah.
The thing is, and this, I think you can broaden out to life in general rather than just looking at it. You know, looking at foreign policy and looking at what governments do and what greedy corporations do, is that the solutions that we propose are often the cause of our new problems. So we're very quick to come up with solutions, and we're very reticent to actually look back and see that the problems that we're trying to solve are actually the result of our previous solutions. And this is a never-ending cycle, because nothing's ever good enough for us as individuals, as a society. We always want more. Things can always be better. And so we come up with these solutions to make things better, to stop things from getting worse, to prevent this or promote that, or whatever it is. But all of these plans and schemes create new problems. And it's a never-ending cycle of supposed solutions creating a vast number of problems. And there's no end to that.
Do you mean on as in a national level?
I mean, on a human level, yeah.
Well, on a human level, it's a bit different.
As in, like, it's common in many different aspects of human life. You know, like this need for solutions. You know, this constant desire to get things and to keep hold of things and to take things from others.
That side, though, on an individual level, is human nature, though. That's not a modern thing.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Just modern day just enables us to do it much more than we need to, which translates into greed.
No, we constantly see problems.
Constantly seek problems?
See problems.
See problems.
See problems. Which aren't necessarily problems. We call them problems. We describe them as problems. And then we come up with solutions for these problems. But the solutions we come up with are the cause of new problems. And that, you know,
you're talking about every single government policy that's happened in the last 5 years. I reckon everything they're saying. Yeah.
Well, that's why it seems so chaotic and so out of control, because they haven't quite grasped that everything they do creates new problems.
There's been a shift, mate. There's been a shift, I think, over the last. It's been the biggest over the last 3, 4, 5 years, and it was happening. It was happening way before that. Anyway, it was a slow creep, and that shift. I mean, is that the ability of politicians to do what they want to do, ignore what the electorate wants, and now they don't even pretend they're listening. I mean, Starmer's a prime example. At least, like before, sort of predecessor, who was, fucking how many Tory predecessors? They would at the very least pretend they were listening, and they would say they were going to do the things that you're concerned about. Starmer doesn't even bother doing that anymore. It's like there's been a shift in what our leaders can get away with. They're not. I don't believe they're serving the public at all in any way, shape, or form. Of course not. It's just hot air coming out, and that's for successive governments. That's not me knocking Keir Starmer. I don't like the guy, but he's just the latest in a litany of people who are not there to serve the public, and that plays out in catastrophic ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Things I wouldn't have said 6 years ago when we were talking. Yeah.
It's there's no answer to any of this, you know, like there's no there, the answers are part of the problem.
Let's get back into the questions. Right. We got a shed load of them. Normally we take about 20 minutes at the end of this. They're going to take longer. So, all right. The last one I was asking was from David, wasn't it? Okay, let's go on to another one from David. Okay, at the Oxford Union. At the Oxford Union. Come on, drag those memories up. At the Oxford Union, you famously dismissed patriotism. Ooh. I didn't know this. You famously dismissed patriotism as a false religion, condemning the professional military's aggressive culture. For those who value national service as a civic duty, how do you counter the claim that strong patriotism is essential for military cohesion and morale?
Patriotism is a false religion. I'll state it again for you.
I need you to expand on that for me, because right now I completely disagree with you.
Right. I mean, where to start with this one? I mean, you can tell I'm out of practice with this. I've got no quick answers for anything.
So if it helps you, I've not discussed this topic myself before, so we're about to do it.
Let's look into this. Right. So what is patriotism? Could we not describe it as a form of identity?
I describe it as a love for one's country and and your culture.
Let's take that back though. So a love for something that you identify as and identify with. Is that true? So I would say that all forms of identity are false religions.
Go on.
So it's not just, I mean, patriotism is a false religion, you know, I won't back down on that one. But that all forms of identity are at the fundamental level nonsense. And so they're almost ridiculous. I'm this, I'm that, I'm not this, I'm not that. These stories we tell about ourselves and our societies are a fabrication.
In what way? But
well, of course they are. There's nothing fundamental about them.
But patriotism is just an extension of patriotism, right? All it is loyalty to the tribe, except these days we have borders, we have countries. And patriotism, if it's loyal to the tribe and community and caring most about those who are in your tribe, it is simply it's a survival mechanism.
No. It's
yes.
No. There's no survival mechanism.
So
the survival mechanism requires no words, no language. There is no language in a survival mechanism. Okay? So anything that involves words, anything that involves an explanation, a meaning, that requires explanation, that gives meaning to something through words, is nothing to do with survival. The animals have a perfectly functioning survival mechanism, and it doesn't involve any language, doesn't involve any words, doesn't involve any concepts of identity. And
that's completely wrong. Of course it does.
No, I'm talking about verbally, right?
But patriotism, tribal loyalty. It's not verbal. It's not just verbal. It's verbal and visual.
No.
So we exist
unless the visual concept, the visual component that you're maybe alluding to is the flag, is it, or the what then?
People.
Right. No, that's separate. That doesn't require the words.
This is identity, though.
No.
So patriotism is loyalty to the tribe, and you know your tribe from what you look like.
Patriotism is something that has been bolted on to what it is to be human. It's not necessary, and it is not fundamental to us. It is a construct that has been that we've been conditioned into. There's
Why do you think that? What I
So
don't
look-
agree with you. So why do you think that we evolved to one in the I want to say the tribe format? We evolved as community beings, right? From the elementary level, so the family side of things,
I get
and
where
then you
you're going.
expand that out to community
But
side.
the thing is that what you're talking about. So let's take the family. Take the family level. That is directly lived, right?
Directly
Lived.
Yeah.
We live directly in that. The thing about patriotism is it requires the taking on of a concept. It requires the taking on of identities that are not lived; they're taught. So the idea that you are Welsh and that I am English, that we are British, is taught. It's not real. It's a concept that has been conjured.
No.
And 100%.
No, if you look at it this way, right? So Welsh, right, is just a label. So being Welsh, Wales is just a label to the group of people who live in that geographical part of the world, right?
See-
And predominantly those people, less so these days, but predominantly those people are all part of the same culture, right? There are subcultures within, but all part of the same culture. So to describe yourself as Welsh, right? And I'm proud of being Welsh. I'm a Welsh patriot, shall we say? To describe yourself as that is not invented. It's just an extension
No,
of
it's-
tribe. It's like modern day labeling of this group of people.
No, it's an invention. It's a total invention. So we can live perfectly well as human beings without any concept of nation, patriotism. These are not necessary. They're
But
not.
would it
They're
still
not
be as-
necessary concepts, and in fact, they are a delusion. They're delusional.
It's just tribe and cultures with names
No,
and borders.
it's not. It's not that at all.
So if there was no borders, if there was no Wales, if there was no England, if there was no names for these
Well,
places,
well,
would we still live in these cultures and tribes and
there is-
communities?
See, there isn't. This might annoy the listeners and yourself, but all of these things are constructed. All of these things are concepts that are imposed upon us. There is nowhere called Earth. There is nowhere really. There is no Britain. These are ideas
No.
that we impose upon the world.
Then it's not an idea and a label. We
They,
talk
of course,
all they are.
they exist in our minds.
All they are is descriptors. All
No.
they are is descriptors. That's all they are.
Okay. We
How
won't.
would you? No. But how would you refer to the? So if England didn't exist and Wales didn't exist, right? England and Ireland, Wales and Ireland, whatever. How would we refer? Welsh, I say we, I point to myself. The Welsh refer to the other people from the other culture across the water, who
Why
are the
other?
Saxons and whatever, the Scandinavians that come in. How would we refer to them?
Look, why other?
Pardon?
Why other?
Because they're different.
Why?
Because they are from a different place. They act in different ways. They have different
but-
values.
but-
They have
but
different values and
place-
standards.
Place is a matter
They
of...
do things that we wouldn't accept. We do things that they wouldn't accept.
we all
If I go
shit.
wandering into that
We all sleep.
area, if I go wandering into that area and try and take one of their wives for my own, yeah,
But that would
they
happen.
wouldn't accept it.
No, but that would happen within your own culture, within your own tribe. If you
Depends
try and
which
take
culture I'm
someone's...
from, right?
No,
Depends which
if you
culture I'm from.
it-
If I went there and wanted multiple wives, they wouldn't be happy with it.
No. Listen, this isn't trying to say that that this isn't holding up that culture and dismissing ours. This is dismissing the very concept of national identity. You know, there are many assumptions that we live with on as human beings. There are many assumptions that we live with that are so ingrained in us that we just accept them, but that doesn't make them true. And this idea of these nations and cultures and patriotism and religions and identities, they're all constructed
You think cultures are constructed?
entirely.
Constructed maybe by the environment you're in and the way you grow and where you live and
They're not
where you
necessary.
evolved. But if you were
They're
gonna,
not necessary.
if you took, they are absolutely necessary, man. If you took people from here, Wales, from England, from London, and you went and put them into, pick a place in Asia, Africa, South America,
Mhm.
right? They would find things very difficult because they are adapted for living and existing in one part of the world, and it doesn't translate to another part. There's a reason that people in Africa are very different to people in London, UK. There's a reason why people in China are very different to people in Russia, because the environments demand different behaviors.
Humans are incredibly adaptable. Incredibly adaptable.
But there's optimal ways of existing, which these people have found.
Humans are incredibly. What is probably true is that humans are incredibly adaptable. We've spread all over this planet, and so you could survive anywhere on this planet. Anywhere that other humans survive, you can survive. This identities that we carry around and cling to and demand that people take these identities seriously and project these identities onto other people. And it's not just the national identities, it's all these other identities that we impose and project upon. They're completely unnecessary. There is no necessity for any of them. And people would, a weight would be lifted if people would just drop them.
No, I don't agree. I think, I mean, we'll get off this point in a minute, but I think we have them because that's how we evolved to have them, right? We evolved to this point because they are a necessity for they're a survival mechanism, right? That's what we've got to this point.
They're not a survival mechanism. I'm
just saying what I think. That's what we've got to this point. But
when did
they do get taken advantage?
We're not biologists, right?
They do get taken advantage of.
They are entirely a tool for control. For control. That is what they're about. There's nothing necessary about them, as far as I'm aware. And like there'll be biologists screaming at the screen now. But human civilization is about 5,000 years old, right? There's probably no concept of definitely no concept of
much older than that. 5,000.
No civilization. 5,000, 10,000. Like as in reading, writing, all of these things. Humans have been around for much longer than that. But the actual reading and writing, this kind of modern stuff, is relatively recent. I don't think we've actually evolved biologically in that time. I might be wrong.
Not long.
The survival instinct was there for tens of thousands of years before that, with no concept of patriotism, no concept of nation. None of these ideas, these identities that we cling to and that were so important to us and are of no importance. They're not necessary. All I'd say is to examine, pick one and examine it.
Pick what?
An identity yourself in your own time and examine it. And examine it closely, and it will dissolve. And you'll see that it's not real. It's something that is imposed upon us, that we then impose upon others. And they're just anyway, yeah. That's all I'd suggest.
Next question.
Oh, was that a question?
Sorry, not from a question.
People are like,
okay, another one from David.
Off.
Your work with Veterans for Peace included meeting former IRA paramilitaries in Northern Ireland, expressing regret over British military actions. What did that dialogue teach you about institutional responsibility?
I'm not sure I understand that question entirely.
Yeah, when you were speaking with the IRA paramilitaries, what did those conversations teach you about institutional responsibility and how would you apply those lessons to other conflict legacies like Iraq and Afghanistan? Are they comparable? Anything comparable there about Northern Ireland? Anything else we've done, do you think?
I'm not sure about that. Northern Ireland is quite specific, isn't it? Because that's within our own nation states, the nation state of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That does change the flavour of it, I think, doesn't it? I would say in terms of meeting those men and women as well, that obviously it was a lot easier perhaps than going to Iraq and doing something similar because there was a shared language. And even though you might think, oh, what have we got in common with those people? Well, we all watch the same television programs, like there's so much that's shared between. It was interesting and nourishing to meet with those people. We met with families of people who were killed on Bloody Sunday. We met with some youth groups. We met with a group of women, IRA women. We met with former paramilitaries in Belfast, in Derry, and in Crossmaglen. And there are many people who've done that who weren't involved with Veterans for Peace as well, because obviously these paramilitaries that we're talking to, they've met with other soldiers who weren't involved with Veterans for Peace. So it's not confined to Veterans for Peace. Yeah, I'm not sure what else to say about that, really. You don't do these things, or personally anyway, I can't speak for anyone else in terms of why we do anything, right? But I don't or didn't do those things with some expected goal or outcome. And I think that's, for me, that's something, not sure if important is the right word, but that's something valuable, to go into something without some expectation or outcome, desired outcome. And so when I went to meet those men, I had no idea what they were going to say. I had no idea what their attitude was going to be like. I had no idea about any of that.
What was the purpose of the meeting?
So a member of Veterans for Peace who was already involved, living in Northern Ireland and involved in these, for example, going into schools with a former British soldier and a former IRA man to talk about their experiences to a school audience. So he was already over there doing that, which was separate from and something else. And so when that guy joined Veterans for Peace, he suggested, we could go out, a group of Veterans for Peace and meet these guys and see where it went. And over the years, we had a few trips over there, had meetings with people over there, and I found it. Like I say, it's not like it can go on, and it led to this, or and I got this out of it, because that was never my intention to get something. It was, I feel like doing that, and so that's what happened. And sometimes it's difficult to put into words what you get out of something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, another question. This one's from Coke. Fellow military members were killed when an RAF plane was shot down in your 2005 Iraq tour, shot down by insurgents. You helped put their body parts into bags at the crash site. Your unit hunted them, and at the time you referred to the insurgents as, in inverted commas, bastards who you wanted to get, presumably to kill or torture. Right now, if you could kill those insurgents to bring those colleagues back, would you? Or would you view this as wrong?
No, I wouldn't kill anyone for any reason.
Apart from, obviously, if your life was threatened.
I'm not even sure about that. This will sound strange, but I do what happens. So there's no way of knowing what would happen. But I have no sort of murderous intent, lethal intent.
That's good
Do you
to
see what I
hear.
mean?
Yeah.
Like an underlying lethal intent. Like it's not something that's lurking in the background, some sort of. Do you see what I mean? So
you
it's,
can
it's
hypothesize, though. I'm going to hypothesize that if someone threatened your life and was about to kill you and you had the option to kill them, you'd kill them first. I'd like you to do that.
Yeah.
I don't want to lose you.
This isn't some, and this is definitely not some moral thing. It's not. It's not that. It's yeah. Anyway, in a way, these are silly questions. It's like it's that question that people often ask. Oh,
They are not.
if there was a guy,
They are not silly questions.
no, if there
these
was
are
a
challenging
guy
ones. They get you thinking.
who had information about a bomb, would you torture him? You know, like these sort of like ridiculous questions. You know, like Kiefer Sutherland questions.
All right, so next question from Coke. Is it possible to create an effective infantry unit like the Parachute Regiment without using what you view as brainwashing, which makes soldiers fanatical and hate outsiders?
Probably not.
It definitely makes us more effective.
I mean, it's proven. That's why it happens.
Yeah. 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 What does interest me is not interests me is the balance. I think, and I think you're going to disagree. I think the balance is perfect where British military training, British infantry training is concerned, and specifically, obviously, because of my own experience, the Parachute Regiment, in that balance between what Koga said, you're in that fanatical soldiers hating outsiders, and that is pure tribalism. That is pure loyalty to the unit. The balance between that, because that means that you will throw everything you can to achieve the mission, as much as you need to do, if that means sacrificing yourself in the process. The balance between that and having the ability to not do something if you think it is not morally acceptable or if it's ethically wrong. I think the balance has been struck well, and I think there's obviously well-known stories. I think there's quite a lot where the USA is concerned, where no soldier will ask a question. They want to ask the question, is this right or wrong? It wouldn't even pop in their head to just do what they're told to do. And I think from my experience, that is not the case with us.
Yeah. I think there's
morality is always there.
I think there's yeah. Yeah, I'd agree that, and I can only talk about my own time I was in the military, but that was a big component of our training, especially pre-operational training. The rules of engagement, basically, and where the line was and using lethal force. That was clear to me. I think it was clear to everyone. In terms of other things, I think on the whole, most human beings are pretty kind. Like most human beings won't do things that we see as abhorrent, and that counts for soldiers too. But lines are definitely crossed, and there's numerous, too many to count, incidents of that, and that happens for a multitude of reasons, doesn't it? So, or none.
Okay, next question from Coke. Okay? How were disagreements handled in the SAS? You said on a raid, so much explosives you used were used. You weren't sure how the kids inside weren't killed. After there was a huge row about the use of explosives in civilian areas, some said keep it to a minimum. We don't want to hurt people. Others said fuck them as long as we're not hurt. There was a real divide. So he's referencing some other interview that you've done here, I'm
Right.
assuming. So how were disagreements like that handled when you were at Hereford?
I'm not sure if there's a sort of one size fits all answer
It's a
to
pretty
this.
extreme example there, by the way.
But in terms of how a disagreement's sorted within a human group,
How
you
is
know,
that, how is
like
that handled? I mean,
there's a variety of ways, isn't there? And obviously in the military, there's always the authority of rank that kind of is the deciding factor, isn't there? You know, um, were these things decided? You know, I can't even remember. You know, I can't even remember. Was it the case that some of us just use less and some of us use more?
mm,
I can't remember.
what do you think about what's going on now? How do you think it
Where
should be handled? When we were talking in the icebreaker, or was it off air? Was it off air? Or was it on the icebreaker? You were basically saying that some people, if there's an institutional problem, and I don't believe that's the case with Hereford or special forces in general in the UK. I don't believe there's an institutional problem. I may be wrong, but that's what I don't believe. But if that is the case, that basically highlighting finding scapegoats to prosecute, I think this is what you're referring, is the wrong way to go about it. An institutional change can't be brought about that way.
No, I think there's a long history in Britain where the state, in whichever of its guises, be that the police, the military, undercover cops, MI5, MI6, you know, you name it, um, breaks the law. And the usual sequence of events is it's denied, 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 denied. Maybe there's sort of investigation by some journalists, or there's a legal challenge, more denials, a little bit more information comes out, a few more denials. Um, then it becomes sort of like a game of, right, how much of this do we have to, are we being forced to admit to, or how much of this information is it in our interest now to reveal, to try and, you know, throw them a piece of meat, get the wolves away. You know, so we see that, and this can go on for years and years and years. You know, we can name incidents. You know, Bloody Sunday. I don't know how many inquiries there were into that. Was it 2 or 3 in the end? Hillsborough, the undercover cops. I don't know how aware you are of this, but you know, this has been going on for years. The fact that Metropolitan Police put undercover officers into activist groups who then formed relationships with women, and you know, had long-term relationships with them, had children with these people, and then just disappeared back to their wives, you know, 2 years later. You know, all of these things, whether it's Bloody Sunday, Hillsborough, these undercover cops, what happened in Iraq, what happened in Afghanistan.
Hillsborough.
Yeah, well, in terms of how long it took for the police, the South Yorkshire police, to admit that they played a part in making the situation worse,
Oh, because they kept people in, right?
or whatever they did. You know,
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
what I'm saying is in all of these things, there's a pattern of denial and dismissing the concerns of people, belittling the people making the accusations, belittling the victims. You know, like all of these things, and it goes on and on and on, and little bits are released and little bits are released, and at some point, sometimes some scapegoats are found. You know, and I'm not saying that these people are innocent. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have been punished or they shouldn't have been brought to the public attention. What I'm saying is that what happens is, rather than accepting some sort of institutional responsibility, rather than accepting that actually this is a problem we all created, we pick out someone, we scapegoat someone, whether that be a couple of soldiers on Bloody Sunday, rather than the company commander, the brigade commander, the politicians who signed off on the orders. We will end up singling out undercover cops who will be named and shamed, rightly so, but their commanders and the Home Office minister who signed off on this. So we pretend to ourselves that it's the actions of a few bad apples. And then it all happens again in some other guise, in some other way, because there's nothing actually changes. All that happens is some people are singled out and sort of handed over for sacrifice, some sort of ritual sacrifice, public sacrifice, and then it carries on. And that's a pattern, and there's no denying that. We had a guy in Veterans for Peace who passed away not too long ago, who had joined the British Army in 1949 and served in Malaya. And if anyone listening to this podcast think they had it hard in Afghanistan or Iraq, these guys were sent out. I think they were out for a year or 2 years. That was the posting, because you had to sail out there, and there was no way that the British government at the time could afford to fly you back on leave. Anyway, he was involved in clearing up the mess of an atrocity that was carried out at a place called Batang Kali, where British soldiers massacred a village. This is 15 years before Vietnam, before the American involvement in Vietnam. Like we hear about these things happening in Vietnam, but the same thing happened in Malaya. And he was sent to this village to, I'm pretty sure, to bury the dead, that had been massacred by another unit recently. And the people, the surviving families of those who were killed, campaigned for years. There were people campaigned about that for years and years and years and years, and nothing ever happened. And one of the strategies of the British state is to just drag things out until everyone's dead. Whether that's the Mau Mau, in Kenya, where we were torturing people over in Kenya, or, the Bloody Sunday, when I think it was David Cameron who eventually apologized for that. A lot of the family members whose children or fathers, brothers, sisters had been killed on that day. Was there women involved? I can't remember. I might, don't quote me on the hard facts of this, but the point counts. They'd passed away, and that's an ongoing thing. So I don't know where we started with that, but there's this habit that we have of finding the bad apples, and blaming everything on them, as if the rest of us were completely innocent, and upright, and that there was no institutional involvement in these things. And I don't think that's the case.
Maybe not the case in all. Maybe it's the case sometimes, but not this. A lot of the time it is bad apples. But one of the problems is not one of the problems. But yeah, I suppose one of the problems. Bloody Sunday as an example. No, not well. Yeah, one of the problems is that if you're an organization with processes and procedures and rules and regulations and ethical guidelines and standard operating procedures and rules of engagement and all that, and you are engaged with, or dealing with an insurgency, for example, or IRA type organization, then it's very easy to be able to identify wrongdoing in your own organization, be able to identify bad apples, identify bad practice, and it's very difficult to identify that in the opposition. It becomes used as a weapon against you. Bloody Sunday, as an example, like Bloody Sunday, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that they were fired upon. Now, does that mean that, as in the soldiers were fired upon, and that there was IRA presence there, or Republican, terrorist presence there at that incident? Now, does that excuse the reaction that occurred from the British side? It does not.
But I think we've got to be careful there, because and I am no expert on anything and no authority
Neither.
on anything. But I'm pretty sure that if we read the final um, statement made by the British government on this, that in terms of what if we look at where they started in the early 70s, I think, was it Widgery? See, this is why it's difficult talking about these things, because I know there's people shouting at the screen going, you got it all wrong, you got it all wrong.
Yeah.
But if we look at where the British government started in terms of what they said about the incident and where they finished, there's quite a variation.
That doesn't surprise me though. Over that length of time,
and if we're
opinions
saying that,
change.
oh, actually there was some bad apples in that unit, and well, then why weren't they offered up at the time? Just because they weren't, right? This is a bit more subtle than that. It's not to say that there aren't, there aren't people. There aren't people at the face of it pulling the trigger. In whatever way that is. Like making the decision, carrying out the action that leads to great harm. What I'm saying is to pretend that they were just a bad apple and this is the actions of a psychopath. That doesn't cover what's actually happened. There's institutional involvement in all of these things, and if there is, and that's all I'm saying is that this is what the British, what we do in our society, again and again, is going through this process, of dragging things out, deny, put a little bit of information out, on and on and on it goes, until usually 30, 40 years afterwards, someone's offered up as a sacrificial lamb. I
think the main reason those things happen is because of the kind of political system we have, in that you've got a 5-year term for a prime minister. You've got hear me out. You've got a 5-year term for a prime minister. You've got parties constantly vying for popularity, and to be able to delay something 4 or 5 years is dead easy, and to be able to switch people's focus is dead easy. And you do it long enough, kick the can down the road long enough, and you get a situation like bloody Sunday was, 30 odd years later, was a Savile inquiry, right? No, not Savile inquiry. It was
I think it wasn't until Cameron, the prime minister, who finally apologised for Bloody Sunday. So that's 40 years after the event. But no, what that does is, when we focus only on the political, see, this is another thing. So it's very easy to then go switch fire from the bad apples at the coalface to the political master, right? So that's an easy switch, right? You go, right, we're not going to blame the guy at the bottom, we're going to blame the guy at the top. But that misses it too. That's not to say that they don't have responsibility, but there's the institutional responsibilities. And so within the British state, for example, like some powerful institutions, the British Army, the Metropolitan Police, MI5, MI6, the Home Office, you get the picture. These have their own interests, their own long-term interests. And they have a part to play in this. Of course they do. A major part to play in all this. So when it comes to all the denial and the kicking the can down the road, it's not just the politicians doing that. It's who do you think applies the pressure on the politician? Because, the politician is thinking about public opinion. But one of the things about our political system is that once people get into government, they're under incredible institutional pressure.
In what way?
All of the different institutions, all of the different sort of ministerial departments are all pushing their agenda, in a selfish way. The Met Police wants as much money as it can get. The Army wants as much money. The RAF wants more money. So imagine like the Chief of the Defence Staff, he's trying to get the budget for the whole military. But then within that, there's the 3 heads of the Army, Navy, and the Air Force all pushing, and they couldn't care less. They're not. People might say, oh, we're thinking about the bigger picture. But when it comes to it, the head of the Metropolitan Police couldn't care less what happens to the South Yorkshire Police. Like if his budget's bigger and the South Yorkshire Police goes without, he's like, great, I got a bigger budget this year. The army and the navy, like they're constantly fighting over resources. That's why it's so important about who gets promoted to chief of the defence staff, because that has a bearing, right? Of course it does. How could it not? And so all these institutions are constantly pushing for their own agenda, and at the base of it, any institution, any organisation, is an entity in itself. It exists in it as a thing that human beings pass through and populate, but it survives beyond these humans passing through it, right? Like it survives for longer, and at its base, its ambition is to survive, and sometimes that ambition to survive overrides all other concerns, right? Whatever those concerns might be or should be. That entity wants to survive, and that leads us into some strange places and some.
Yeah, I agree. I know what you mean. It can. I mean, the most the most obvious example of that to me is, well, entities or initiatives. An example of that is they pick a cause, or they pick a focus, they pick a reason to go and do A, B, or C thing, and the outcome of which, the objective of which, is not a measure. You can't measure it. It's not a tangible thing you can measure. It's a variable that's based on what's the word? Based on a concept, nothing real. The Great War on Terror is a prime example of that. We can redefine terror as much as you want. You can redefine terrorists as much as you want to fit the reason to perpetuate the war. The war on drugs is another example. Obviously, US side. The war on drugs is another example of that. You can change these things. These are based on perceptions, and they can change the perceptions willy-nilly, influence people to carry it on. I know what you mean. Okay. Coke from Coke. In a raid, in a raid, an SAS soldier held a child at gunpoint, unjustified in your view, and you said, "What the fuck are you doing?" What was the outcome? What was the outcome of that? Also, what was the outcome of the explosives row? Did people challenge these people? Did people challenge the guy with that kid?
Yeah, I challenged that guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was the outcome?
He put his weapon down. And you
Good
can
man.
be
Good man. I mean, you good man.
no, but so is he. Like he. Anyway, so that was the outcome of that. Yeah. The explosives thing, like there's so much that it's difficult to. It's very easy for us to sit here and come up with reasons for things. Like put together, and it would be there would be some truth in it, but it can never be the whole picture, could it? Like with things like that, in terms of the use of explosives, like we can never know what was going through someone else's head. We know what they're saying to us. We don't know. We just can't know.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but there are principles, right?
Yeah.
There are principles by which you would think that most people in their right mind commonly adhere to. That example there of putting a weapon to a child's head, like, my God, like I wouldn't dream of that in a million years. And I wouldn't like to think anyone I ever serve with would do the same thing.
Yeah.
But these outliers exist. The next question on you actually from Coke is, if these issues arose in 3 para, it says to me, if these issues arose in 3 para, how would they be resolved? If anyone I serve with, including myself, source another member of the unit putting a gun to someone's head, not only would they be challenged, I think there'd be some violence enacted, probably later on, because that's fucking mental. But that's like, it's a very different unit. The 3 paras are a very different unit to what a special forces unit is, as much as I hate to admit that.
But you know, like anyway, yeah. Um, yeah.
Difficult questions, mate.
What's difficult though is that this is 20 years ago, and I don't hold on to these things. Do you see?
Yeah, but do they not influence the way you think about things now? Like, what your perception of special forces now, your perception of the geopolitical situation, the perception of what the West do, the USA, UK do, interventionist foreign policy. Those past experiences shape what you think now, though, right?
Those past experiences
Shape what you think now.
Yeah, I don't think that's controversial. Is it?
All our opinions are made up from our experiences, right? There can't be anything else.
Maybe not. I mean, it's one of the things that's quite prevalent now, isn't it? How opinions spread so quickly around the internet. You know, like that maybe aren't actually based on lived experience.
Well, like we were saying, I think it was on the icebreaker or before that. Like we were saying then, like these are like opinions made of straw. It was on the icebreaker. I think I was talking about. I was at the start of this. I was talking about activists who their vocation is activist, and they will just pick a thing to be an activist about without actually having any real emotional commitment to it or understanding of the situation.
But we could sort of like spread that out, and just say about opinions that people are invited or expected to form opinions about a wide range of things.
True, very true.
That they have no lived experience of, and I think that's something that that was important when we were running Veterans for Peace, was about the importance of lived experience. That what was being said was as a result of lived experience, rather than some sort of intellectual or academic or newspaper based perspective. But yeah, I mean, if we're at the end of the day, someone says, like you mentioned Ukraine a couple of times and we haven't really gone into it. And part of that is, I have no lived experience of that. No direct experience of that. And I've been around long enough to know that I've been involved in enough incidences, all sorts of different incidences, not just military, a whole wide range of stuff that's been reported that doesn't bear any resemblance. The report doesn't bear any resemblance to my own lived experience. Now, that's not to say, like that's with the caveat that our own lived experiences are narrow, that we can only see part of what's going on, all of these things. But a lot of the opinions that are formed about Ukraine, for example, there's no direct lived experience. And in fact, there's no actual way of knowing if what's actually happening over there, is there?
Well, it's a very different war than what you've seen before, because you got, well, obviously the first person footage, which is just everywhere.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of first-hand accounts coming out, right? I don't know if you know. I know people have been out there.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that there's no way for us to be certain about what's actually happening, is there? In terms of what's happening over there, but both sides are putting out claims about ground they're taking or atrocities that have happened, and I'm not saying that any of that has or hasn't happened, but if I'm honest, I've got no way of knowing. I really haven't got any way of knowing about what is real, what is fact, what is propaganda, what is misinformed. But people then form very strong opinions about these things, one way or the other. I find that difficult to do at this time in my life, like in terms of, in a way, pretending to know, pretending
Yeah.
to know what's happening and then pretending to know what should be done.
Yeah, there is a problem there, and I know exactly what you mean, and I definitely went through a period uh at some point over the last, or at some point since we last did a podcast, right? And I definitely went through a period of not wanting to commit to an opinion on anything because I was so unsure of what I could believe about anything, what is true and what is not, unless I firsthand experienced it. And that kind of makes sense, but I also think that there are things that to get into a position where you won't form an opinion on anything is a real bad position to be in, because that can pull you into a position of distrust about everything. I think you should distrust. I think you should be skeptical about most things
Yeah.
that you're reading or watching online. It's always online, isn't it? Be skeptical at most things, and especially where the news is concerned or where politicians are concerned, whether they're our own or whether it's overseas. I definitely think you should always think first off, is that true, or is that information being represented in the right way?
See, the thing about information is it's not neutral, never neutral. What I'm saying now isn't neutral. What you're saying isn't neutral, but even more so online or in organized or you know, official, not even official, in the organized dissemination of information is never neutral. Why? Why is this information being disseminated? Why is this information being produced? It's about narrative. So most of if we think about it, the news is about narrative. This is happening. These are the reasons why. This is what you should do. This is what you should be afraid of. This is what we're doing about it. But it's about narrative. And the thing about every narrative is every narrative has an author. So every story has an author. And author is a derivative of the word authority. That's where it comes from. Author, authority. So the author is the authority. And so what we're seeing with all of this information that's being pumped out, we're there thinking, oh, is this true or not? That's not the question. The question is, who is pumping this out and for what purpose?
I think that's true a lot of the time, but I
I-
also think a lot of the time a
Is-
narrative can be generated by a large amount of people. So when we talk about narrative, let's say it's an incorrect narrative. A narrative can be generated by an awful lot of people coming to what seems to be a logical conclusion, which turns out to be incorrect later.
Yeah.
And on that basis, headlines are made about something which seems to be the general consensus from the population, even more so now online.
I would say
It's
that
both situations.
that what we're seeing on a more day-to-day level is we could call them organizations, institutions, whatever you want to call them, entities. And I don't mean that in some spooky way. I'm just, like trying to say not exclude, right? Because there's lots of organizations and individuals doing this, is pushing out news stories. And what those news stories demand of us is that we form an opinion. But there's an assumption there. See, the assumption is that this is something that is important that I should form an opinion about. And what we don't look at is what's behind it. And that is, who is pumping this story out now and what do they want? And that is the real question. Who is pumping it and what do they want?
Pause on that because I need to go to the toilet. My last guest is an ex-military guy, but he's a senior news editor at a major news company here in the UK, and we talked about this. So back in 2 minutes, go back. We're back, Coke. All right. Oh yeah. So where were we? Oh yeah. So my last guest, guest before this, is a guy called Paul Tyson. Paul's ex-Queen's Regiment. I think he served 6 years. He's been with ITV for nearly 30 years now. And I brought that question up. Like how are stories decided about going out? How I felt the same way. There's there's agendas and there's narratives that are controlled, we put out through legacy media. And his opinion and his experience, and he's an editor himself, and he was also a war journalist, you know, his experience is that it's not the case. They put stories together they think should be told. And I also asked the question about revenue generating. Like, you're not going to put if it's a story is more likely to get the clicks and the likes and get that engagement for your ad revenue, you're not more likely to put that out. Does that not play a factor? His idea was no. He said, obviously sometimes there are going to be stories which is like, we've got to do this right now because it's the thing right now. But most of the time, it's no.
Well, let's put it this way. So,
as an example, as an example of what you're saying.
Yeah.
So right now he's been spending about a year and a half now putting a story about TBIs together. There's not a lot of interest in it. It's not like it's not like it's some like big massive expose. It's going to turn the world on its head. But he sees it as a really important thing to do.
Yeah, there's no denying that you know, journalists will cover things that, you know, they'll cover a wide variety of stories. You know, I know journalists that investigate stuff for years and years and years. No, what I'm saying is that the question that should be asked is, why am I being shown this now, and what do they want? Because there are no stories without some sort of wants behind them.
I think that's almost always true for what is coming from politicians.
No,
and that definitely influences what the media say.
No,
right?
that's the same with pretty much any story. You know, like that's being told. The storyteller wants something. And that is often more interesting and more revealing than the story that's being told. What do they want?
What's the last thing that you've seen that you thought that?
Well, we're being shown, you know, endless. Let's put it this way. So, we go through a cycle in this country of news stories, for whatever reason. But, you know, for a few months, over the last few years, you know, for a few months, it'll be Ukraine. Then that disappears out of the news agenda, and then it'll be Israel. Then that disappears out. Then it's a bit of domestic stuff, you know, like then it'll move on again. Now, whilst we're shifting our focus from this to this, those other things are still carrying on, right? Now, for example, that, you know, like we had a spell maybe 2 years ago where it was climate change, or however you want to phrase that subject matter, was all over the media. Then it disappears. So we're being shown these different things.
Why do you think that is?
Well, that's not by chance, is it?
But why do you think that's happening?
See, it doesn't matter what. This is the thing. It doesn't actually matter why. It really doesn't.
I think it does.
No.
Because if you know the why is normally something that is
no.
Is trying to get you to not do something or keep your focus away from, which means that the why is important.
See, there's a simpler way of dealing with this, and that is that they want something. That's all you need to know.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what they want. It doesn't matter what they want you to want. It doesn't matter what they want you to see, what they don't want you to see. It's that they want something. And that's enough. That's enough to see. You want something. Because the thing is that we watch all this without reminding ourselves that someone wants something out of this.
Yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying. Like the constant change, not constant change, but the switch from whatever existential crisis thing is going on, I agree with you. Be that a war, be that a threat to the UK, be that a threat to the world, climate change, whatever. These things, I think, in the last few years, at the very least, where it has become more obvious that's happening. I was thinking at one point that it's more obvious that it's happening now because there's just more information online. It's more difficult for them to keep information away from society, or is it a case that it's actually gotten worse? I think it's actually gotten worse. I think what's happened is that they've started realizing a lesson that got taught decades and decades and decades ago, which was not, in fact, even before that, and that is that if you keep, mentioned this earlier, if you can keep the public thinking that there's some existential threat to their existence, their country, their family, their home, and that is outside of the domestic setting, outside of the UK, then it means that it distracts society, distracts the electorate away from the actual things that really matter and that really impact them, like the people who govern them, for example. As long as the UK government, the US government, or any other government, if they want to do it, can keep people in a state of fear, shall we say, or at the very least concern with some other thing, which they can't do anything about themselves. It takes the government to do something about it for them, be that military action, for example, be that weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, be that the threat of terrorist organizations in Afghanistan, be that the threat of a dictator in Northern Africa, for example. Then it means that people are distracted away from actually bringing about the change that I think is really needed, which is decent people in the positions of power, which can actually influence policy, which is good for the country.
There's quite a lot to take in.
You weren't taking notes?
I wasn't taking notes. I was listening.
I think this is what is meant when people say this is just a distraction. Ukraine is just a distraction. Israel is just a distraction. COVID is just a distraction. Climate change is just a distraction. Saddam Hussein is just a distraction.
From what?
From focusing inward and actually looking at the people who are in charge of us and going, you are not doing what is right for this country and right for me. I want rid of you. I want something decent inside. A distraction from the fact that our political system is rotten to the core. It's never happened twice in this podcast.
That's your next guest.
yeah. That the political system is rotten to the core. I think that's a distraction. And I think as soon as the distraction disappears, people start realizing it. More people start turning out to vote. More people start actually doing something that makes a real tangible difference in their lives.
Yes. I mean, the funny thing is, if you look, for example, at the UK, is there really much of a difference, really, in changing of, the changing of the government?
No.
Right. Even if we could look at it on a load of different ways, but if we just look at it economically, I think what often happens just before a general election is the papers will tot up how much each government's going to cost you. Obviously that turns out to be nonsense because they soon change their plans, but it often comes up to some crazily small amount. So economically, as far as the manifestos are concerned, you're going to be £100 better off under Labour, or you'll be £100 better off under the Tories. It's not much, maybe £500, So even in that in itself, economically, there ain't no change.
I don't think that's necessarily the case. The reason I say that is because
they put these stories in the paper, don't they?
Oh, right, yeah, but they're tangible. Oh, I see what you're saying.
Do you see what I mean?
Sorry.
They put these out. They go, oh, we've gone through the manifestos, and you'll be 10 quid better off under Labour a year. It's, it's like, 20 pence a week or whatever that is.
As if that is the only measure of quality of life.
But also as if that's some sort of significant difference. The other thing that we should keep in mind about all this, though, is about a lot of this is purely about maintaining our attention. You know, um, I mean that's been a major change in our own lifetimes in terms of
What you mean?
how much attention we now give to video and the written.
Mm-hmm.
People think that we read less now. You don't often see people with books, but I saw something the other day that apparently we've never read more. You know, if you add up all the words that we read, you know, like in terms of the actual reading that's done is an incredible amount, and the watching, the reading and the watching, and
Mostly nonsense, though, right? This is the problem.
but that doesn't matter. See, what a lot of these platforms really demand is the attention. It's almost like they're sort of like jealous, you know, like if you're on something else, and so these platforms, whatever it is, you know, whatever your poison is looking to take as much of your attention as possible. There's no end to the demand. If you could be on there 16 hours a day, great. You know, on the same platform, even better. And that's something that we haven't really come to terms with. Like, forget about the content. Whether it's, you know, conspiracy theories, podcasts, cat videos, whatever, ice bucket challenges, you know, all endless, you know, political arguments, nonsense. What's going on, you know, like in our lived experience, like put all that content to one side and our lived experience, that is our life. This paying of attention to these words and these screens are endless. That's quite something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. It's a real problem. It's a real problem. It makes you wonder what the net impact of that lack of awareness of even just your immediate surroundings, the environment to go through, how that impacts how the generation below us will grow up.
I mean, I was on the plane yesterday and we're in the waiting room. What do you call that? Departure lounge. I've been mucked up by my niece who comes up with these really funny names for things. So,
well, I'll give you one.
She got
not the airport; it's the plane station.
Well, I was just about to tell you that one.
Oh yeah, yeah. God damn it! I made that one up.
Well, my niece is Welsh, so there's a. But I just burst out laughing when she came up with this, and other people were getting quite sniffy about it.
Did she say it as a joke, or did she actually say it? A plane station.
The plane station. Well, like the train station, yeah, you know. And the thing is we get so fussy about all these things, but actually it makes perfect sense, right? There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, when you think about it, an airport is just as ridiculous, right? It's just.
Well, I have actually thought about this. So a port is a port not the word for it's the word for a place where you change from one method of transport to another, land to sea, sea to air.
Well,
air to land.
I think historically it's land to sea.
Okay.
You know, like there's no sort of gravity-defying element to it. But anyway, so yeah, she come up with the plane station. So I've become completely open to these alternate words now. So the waiting room, but that's obviously the departure lounge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, there was this young mother in there. I think the child was about one, crawling around, and the amount of time she was spending on her phone. And that's not some sort of criticism of her, but you know, think of all of that direct transmission that probably happens between mother and child in those first 5 years. Most of it unspoken, eye contact, gone, missing from that.
Oh, it's terrible. It's real bad, you know.
Well, we don't know. We don't know what the outcomes will be.
No, I know. I think we'll see them in literally personality disorders. I think we've seen them already. Personality disorders and increases in mental ill health, mental conditions. I think that's how they manifest themselves, depending on a million variables. But you know, it is important. I mean, we're going right from the tangent here, but it is important that children are exposed to technology because they grow up with it. But exactly what you just said, my God, you got two identical children. Let's say a twin study, two identical children. You stick one child who phone and on the phone 100% of the time, and the other child no phone. And exactly what you're saying, their eyeballs, even before they can speak, their eyeballs are taking everything in. They are just learning. They're seeing their mother or their father, the way they behave physically. They're seeing their facial expressions. They're seeing their physical movements. They're seeing colors. They're hearing sounds. They're seeing the movement of other things. They are feeling a sensation on their face and seeing why it happened. A gentle breeze went past because a bus or something just flew past, or a window opened. All these things that are taken in before their brain can even form a word or even knows what a word is. And these, the way that child grows up like that, that is how all of us grew up. You did, I did, all of our generation grew up like that. And I think by and large, most parents these days are bringing their children up. Most parents, I like to think, are bringing their children up where there is a hard limit on when that child is going to be allowed to, one, have a smart device, and two, and how long they're going to be allowed to spend on any other smart device anyway.
Sorry, no, this was the mother who had the.
Oh, the mother had.
Do you see what I mean?
Oh, right.
So
even worse.
How many kids
it's
are growing
even
up?
worse.
And this is
it's
what I
even
mean.
Worse.
So their view of their parents is this.
Yeah.
Because.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're here.
Yeah.
That's what I was getting at.
Terrible.
Well, and that's about attention and the demands on our attention and all of this content, whatever it is, and it always seems really important, whether it's
no way.
3 in a go.
3 people just bursting.
All of these stories seem really important. Or we're just kind of sucked into them, like whatever it is, But are they really that important?
No, right. And most of the time, people are spending doom scrolling and not important stories. I get caught on it all the time. All the time. Is that doom scrolling and it's half an hour's gone by, and I'm looking at nonsense on Instagram. If it wasn't for, I said this a million times, if it wasn't for the podcast and the need to be on social media to be able to put stuff out about the episodes, I wouldn't be on there. The sooner I can palm off to someone else, I'll be off it. For exactly what you probably do. You spend zero time or next to zero time on these things. But again, tools for distraction, but different reasons behind the distraction. That kind of distraction there, the platforms, because it generates money for them. If they can hone your attention, they can sell your attention.
But even if we think about television, which is kind of old school, that all of these things are taking us away from our lived lives, our real lives, and projecting onto us, imposing upon us concerns that are not direct concerns, and the energy and the energy that then is consumed by these concerns that are not direct concerns, that are not lived concerns. That's quite something, and it's not necessary. It's not necessary. We don't need to do that. Believe it or not, when you stop reading all this stuff and stop watching all this stuff, nothing happens, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't change anything, But we get caught in this, thinking that we need to keep on top of all this information, I need to keep accumulating knowledge. I need to keep accumulating information, and it's not necessary.
So one of the ways they do this, and it actually really impacts people's lives. So, like governmental organizations do it, and people, individuals, organizations want to capture your attention for other reasons do it, and that is that they overcomplicate matters. They overcomplicate things. So it feels like you're never on top of a subject. It feels like you need to find more information on it, pay for more information, pay for X, Y, or Z thing before you can start X, Y, or Z thing. Fitness is a classic example. Improving your diet is a classic example. Getting a bit more understanding politics a little bit more, so you're actually going to pay attention to who you vote for next time is a classic example. All way overcomplicated to the point where it becomes almost analysis paralysis. People spend so much time to work out what they should do as opposed to actually making a decision on something. I think really inhibits people. Another question for you. Okay, from Coke again. As organizations, but also down to the average member, were the IRA, Iraqi insurgents, and Taliban morally better or worse than the British soldiers they were fighting? Ooh. Ooh.
I mean, there's no way of sort of measuring that. There really isn't. Like it would be just something made up. To try and suggest that some are morally as a unit, as a whole, as a collective,
both, as
morally
an organization
superior.
or as the average member.
Yeah, I mean, does it matter? What does it matter? Well, is it even measurable? What difference would it make? I don't know.
I think you can. I mean, I say the British, on an individual level. Let's take the IRA for example. I'd say on an individual level, on average, British soldiers were had the moral high ground over the IRA. I'd say in general. When I say that, what I factor in is I would say that a lot of the IRA, in fact, at an organizational level, especially in the later years, we're not a part of that organization. Their objectives were not what they set out to do, and they were more on the greed side and influence side as opposed to a united Ireland. They took advantage of the situation, and the same can't be said for British soldiers. They can't do that.
I just don't think it's almost like saying, it's like those questions about who are the better fighting force, the Roman legion or the Crusaders or just see what I mean.
But you could also argue, mate, that so on the British soldier side, organized institutions like this, a military institution like the British military, as you and I both experienced, we have morality and we have ethical guidelines drilled into us. You cannot say the same for you cannot say the same for less organized organizations like the IRA, certainly not the Iraqi insurgents, and certainly not the Taliban. You have a higher standard
of what?
Following moral and ethical guidelines. You have a standard there. And you have standardized doctrinal repercussions for breaching those. Sometimes not followed, but most of the time they are.
Yeah, I mean,
the IRA is a great example. Actually, there's a lady I was speaking to.
If we look at it, like because sometimes we have to let these questions sink in, and the thing is what people tend to do is they tend to focus in on something, and there might be a certain truth to it at that level. So take an individual Taliban and an individual British soldier and ask them, what are you prepared to do to achieve your aims? And what the British soldier is prepared to do to achieve his aims, what he's willing to do on the battlefield, might be more to our taste than what the Taliban came up with. Right. Then let's park that to one side and stop all these hypothetical questions about, which footballer was the best, Maradona or Pele, and all this kind of stuff. And go, right, let's look at... It's surprising. So most Welsh people would say Maradona, but...
I've got Argentine family as well, so... Yeah.
And let's look at the actual... the whole picture, as if that's possible. And if we look at the actions of coalition forces in Iraq and Afghanistan and look at the death and the maiming and the starvation, the denial of healthcare, the destruction of the education systems in those countries, even the mass unemployment, the mass incarceration, the torture, add all that up and then tell me about the morality of our society. and I'm not having it. Like I'm not having it. It's this thing. Like it's this endless game of going. Look at the water in this glass, and you're going, and it all comes out of this bottle over here. No, don't look at that. Look at this. Look at the glass. Look at the glass.
What about the situation in Afghanistan now? Do you think so? In Afghanistan now, and Afghanistan before we went in 2000 and I think late 2001, the first operation was in there. 2 power, wasn't it? 2001, 2002. Yeah, Afghanistan now, a more humane place to live than it was when we were there, or not?
There's no way of knowing, and the thing
there is, because you've got governmental policies from the Taliban.
No. The thing is if we were to be honest about this, we could go back and back and back and say, right, when was our first involvement? And I think is it the 1830s or something like that?
It's 1800s, something like that. Yeah,
1830s,
sure it is.
Like that. Right, and then look and see how these interventions that we've made in that country.
Are you about to suggest that the situation they're in now, the root cause is us?
I know.
Okay.
No, what I'm saying is that what actions have outsiders taken, and we can include Pakistan, Russia, America, Britain. They're probably the 4 main players, are they? Like in terms of foreign countries intervening in that country.
Since Afghanistan was a country?
Yeah. Let's just say since 1800.
Okay.
So Britain, Russia, since the creation of Pakistan, I think Pakistan has had quite some influence on that country. And America. We missed something out? Right.
I think so.
That's 4 foreign powers intervening for their own aims in that country. We can't deny that those interventions have had long-term repercussions. And so what I would argue is that there shouldn't be interventions in foreign countries. When I said earlier that, as far as I'm concerned, the most sensible policy that Britain could adopt in terms of foreign policy would become neutral, I would suggest that that counts for every country, that every country become militarily neutral, right? That means not intervening in any other countries. And I can hear the people shouting at the screen saying, oh, what about this? What about that? Intervene for this, intervene for that. That is what I'm saying, and I'm sticking to it. And, I'm willing to go into a long discussion over that.
The problem is that people's interests differ, and they differ from country to country, culture to culture.
What do you mean their interests differ?
The interests differ, and the interests differ based on what they need. And the needs of people differ, the needs of nations differ, the needs of cultures differ, depending on where they are geographically.
What I'm saying is that nation states, as they are, I'm not trying to justify the existence of nation states. I'm just saying that the nation states, as they appear to exist, should refrain from intervening in other nation states. That would be a good start. And there's no way of saying, oh, well, is Afghanistan better because we went there or not? Well, that's not the first time we've been there, so.
The thing is with that attitude, right, and I remember, no, I don't mean attitude in that derogatory way. I mean, that attitude, that strategic, like literally that non-interventionist attitude, right? And oh my God, I'm trying not to go down the route I went with Phil. I'm remembering it now. The thing is that works, okay? I understand.
But it hasn't been tried.
Well, because it can never be done, right? Well, it works until nation A has something that nation B needs, and they can't come, that they need for existential reasons, and nation A will not give nation B that thing, and nation B's people are suffering because of it. Political discourse isn't working. And then nation B gets all fighty.
Let's take this back to where we are today, and none of that counts for Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya. So
no, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about
no, but that's what I'm talking about. And these interventions, cause more problems than they solve. I think that's
Yeah.
not really a controversial statement.
Yeah.
That these interventions cause more problems than they solve, but also there's a cost, an opportunity cost to all these interventions. So when we spend a lot of money on weapons, equipment, training soldiers, paying soldiers, deploying soldiers, aircraft carriers, and all the rest of it, that's energy, resources, money that could be used in other ways. So it's not just that these interventions cause more problems than they solve. They also deny us so much. They deny us, the huge amount that's spent in the United Kingdom, in the United States. And, these countries, there's plenty that money could be spent on or not. So when we're going back to the Afghanistan thing, it's impossible to know. And that's the thing, is when we intervene, we impact. We have an impact. Otherwise, why intervene? And there's no way of knowing what that impact will be. And there's no way for us to say, oh, well, the country's better because we intervened. There's just no way. There's no way of making that calculation. In my view, I don't think there is. And we could make one up, and we could focus in on, oh well, and pick some specific issue to back our argument, but it wouldn't be the whole picture, and there's no way of knowing. There's no way of knowing what would have happened if we hadn't intervened in the first place.
No, but you can Afghanistan as an example. You can compare what it was like when we were there to what it is now.
I don't know what it's like now.
No, but you can look at policies that the government have there, for example, and compare the policies that are there now to what they were when we were there. You can compare the quality of life. You can absolutely measure quality of life. And quality of life is measured across the world. There's literally indexes for it, compared to what it was when we were there.
Though, is that
is not to say that when we were there, that was a wholly positive and the best thing in the world for them. What I'm trying to say is that.
But what about if there hadn't been any intervention in the first place?
Well, that is the case. You
So,
don't know.
do you see what I mean?
I'm not talking about what ifs.
Well, that is a what if.
No, it's not. Comparing what it is now, comparing to what it was.
But yours is an argument for us still being there, then.
No. I'm not saying that. I'm saying you can compare what it is now to what it is when we were there. That's what I'm saying.
But when we were there was an armed insurgency.
Mm-hmm.
So that's better than what there is now.
I'm not suggesting that.
No,
you can compare the two. I would say that the government policies there then
but how
were
far,
much less.
How far did those government policies reach outside of Kabul? What was the reach of those policies?
Probably the same distance as they do now. Maybe they reach further now because, maybe they reach further now. I don't know, but probably the same distance.
What I mean? Like the government, the so-called government that was notionally in charge of Afghanistan during the, almost 20-year occupation, was a sort of a paper one.
Correct, but a lot of the stuff that was imposed upon that government to enact and do was Western orientated ideas of equality, for example.
But I mean, but why should they be imposed on another nation?
I'm not saying they should.
Yeah.
But when you can compare those policies to what the policies of Afghanistan are now, the obvious one is girls' education and the equality of women and men over there. Yeah. Women and men are not treated equally there.
But there are many countries in the world that we could say that that's the case.
I know what we're talking about, Afghanistan.
Yeah, I know, but
because we were there.
There are many countries in the world where that is the case. Are we going to intervene in those?
No, I agree with that. I know.
And a lot of those countries are actually in effect allies. So I just think that these military interventions always cause more problems than they solve, and I'm sticking to it.
I think listen. I agree with you. Most of the military interventions that we've been part of for the last, I don't know, 40 years, 50 years have been problematic. I agree with you. Okay. What would you do differently if you were 18 years old again before joining the army?
Nothing.
I knew you were going to say that. Nothing at all.
I've got no regrets. I don't have any regrets about anything, you know, like, so, there's nothing.
What were the cultures of 2-para and the SAS like? Hugh said in 3-para, Hugh said in 3-para it was normal to be beaten for discipline, and it's the most masculine environment he's ever been in. Correct in the second part. Beaten for discipline. Well, I think what he's referring to now is said a couple of times, like, you know, there was a attitude that if you messed up, depending on what you messed up, you know, some things you mess up when you're getting court-martialed or whatever, formal discipline. Other things would be, okay, do you want to get a slap? Do you want to get a punch? Or do you want to actually go down the formal disciplinary route here and whatever, get an extra weekend on guard or something? So what was the culture of 2-para like? What was the SAS
Well,
like?
I can only really talk about B Company 2-para because that's the only company I was in.
Mhm.
And in B Company 2-para, I would say there wasn't a discipline problem.
There wasn't a what?
A discipline problem. So, you know,
Yeah, when he mentioned discipline, he was talking about being beaten for discipline. So as a disciplinary measure,
yeah,
you're getting battered,
yeah,
getting dropped.
yeah, that just wasn't a thing in B Company 2-para at the time I was in there. I'm not saying that people weren't gripped. You know,
These things vary
these things happen,
yeah.
and it all depends the personalities and
Yeah.
the cultures. But
Yeah.
B Company 2-para, from my own recollection of it, and you know, other people can give their own version of events. But from what I could see, B Company 2-para was was full of good soldiers, and there was a weeding out to other parts of 2-para. So there was a constant process of weeding out. You know, as people come up into B Company, they were moved on. You know,
For what reasons?
if basically, you know, orders come in, don't they? We need to the rifle companies usually, because that's usually where new blokes turn up. New blokes usually come into the rifle company, and then orders would appear. You know, I imagine the company commanders would be told, right, we need 5 blokes off each of the rifle companies to fill places in mortars, machine guns, the MC department, whatever. You know, and that's not forming an opinion about those different companies. It's not about that. What I'm saying is that, and I imagine every rifle company does this, but you keep hold of your best blokes. And B Company 2-para had a lot of good blokes. You know, lots of B Company 2-para ended up at Hereford. You know, I think 3 or 4 times in a row, blokes from B Company 2-para got best student, overall student at Junior Brecon. That's quite something, you know, like when you think of, you've got all those other paras on there and all those other infantry units, and it was, you know, you can go and check the wall at Brecon. You know, I think it's 3. I can think of 3, and I think there's maybe a 4th. You know, top, and that's what B Company 2-para was like, in terms of, so there wasn't the disciplinary culture, and I know that in other companies there was, you know, like other companies there was this much more harsher sort of authoritarian approach, you know, where the Toms were treated almost like Joes, you know, and it was, you know, they were made to do sort of tedious things, you know, like all had to parade whatever their company lines was or their company stores, you know, all day, every day, you know, like, whereas in B Company 2-para, we were sort of left to our own devices a bit more, you know, people were trusted to do their own fitness a bit more. You still have company fitness, but, you know, yeah, so that was the sort of company I was in, you know. a lot of our sergeant majors, they were guys who were going to be regimental sergeant major. There was, it was a high standard of soldiers who were coming through that company. So that might be the same in every rifle company in the parachute regiment, but it might not be. I don't know. But that's what it was like. So there wasn't this constant, I can't remember, like it was so infrequent that people were on company orders, let alone CEO's orders from that company.
In your talk at the Frontline Club on YouTube, you said you had to sign a confidentiality contract upon joining Special Forces due to ex-members Andy McNabb and Chris Ryan writing books of their service. You claimed their books made the SAS look much better than it was. Why do you think their books are dishonest?
I'm not sure about that exactly. I'm not sure if he's quoted me directly. Like, I'm sure it's a paraphrase of what I've said, but I'm not sure exactly.
Probably is. He paraphrases me sometimes.
Yeah. So as far as I'm aware, those confidentiality contracts came out as a result of those books.
That's my understanding as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. In fact, I had a conversation with one of the old 2-2 RSMs, who I think was part of the first, I can't remember what the board was called, Disclosure Board. It was part of the first Disclosure Board, I think, yeah. Yeah, okay. In your Oxford Uni speech, you referred to the British militia uniform as rancid, saying you'd never wear it again, and that patriotism is a vile religion. Well done on speaking there, by the way. I mean, I didn't like a lot of the content of your talk, but it's one of the first things I watched about you before we interviewed. But regardless, being able to go and speak there is amazing. You said you'd never wear it again, and that patriotism is a vile religion. If someone was willing to wear their uniform again in wars like Iraq, which caused civilian deaths, would you view them as rancid? Hugh would, as a follow on to this, Hugh would repeat his service in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Northern Ireland. Is he rancid? I think what I said was I wouldn't change anything.
No.
I'd go back and do it all again.
I
what I knew then.
I wouldn't go back and do it all again.
What I knew then.
Yeah, and that's not a judgment thing, as in like I don't need to do anything again, right? No, the thing is that when you write a speech, like a speech isn't 100% literal. Some of it is metaphor, right? In terms of an actual uniform, I couldn't care less. I have no strong opinions on it. But in terms of, I think in that speech, it's something like it's a direct reference to patriotism, and I will not wear that rancid uniform, which is a metaphor for patriotism. It's not like some sort of icky feeling about putting on a set of camouflage trousers. But take it as you will, and that's the beautiful thing about spoken word, isn't it? Is that everyone will take it as they will. But I don't regret any of that speech. So it was a pretty good one, that one.
How do people view your refusal to redeploy and criticism of British wars?
I don't know. I mean,
have you had much kickback from former colleagues?
You never know what's said in private, do you?
True. I don't want to know either.
You never know what's said in private, but I had a pretty good reference written to me. So when I refused to return to Iraq and I hadn't gone public, pretty good reference from the CO. At that time, the RSM said, "If you change your mind, come back." And definitely in terms of 2-para, but I don't know about Hereford, but in terms of 2-para, I had a pretty good reputation amongst the blokes. Like over the years, many people have got in touch with me and, not said nasty things. What was the question again?
hang on, he's written some of the nasty things here. The question was, how do people view your refusal to redeploy? How would you know how they review it? So you got another question here. Well, what do you think of the negativity you receive? So he's referenced me. I'm going to say this because it's got him using. Hugh said, fuck's sake. Hugh said your description of military training is bollocks. I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about the military training. And your view of ROE in Iraq, Afghanistan is total horseshit. I said this in a conversation with Geraint Jones, highly likely. And
on a podcast?
and in a Discord chat online. Okay.
Hey, look, right.
There's a couple of others you're not going to read out, but
No, read them out.
I mean,
it's fun.
Negative, the negative kickback. I mean, how do you?
Hey, look, right.
Thanks, Coke, mate. Thanks for that. Verbatim. And you should be thanking me for reading it out as well. Anyway, Nigel Ely, Power Edge Falcons, SAS, I'm sure you know who he is, said you were very, very brave for refusing to redeploy.
Yes.
Does it sting at all that there may be people who you respected and worked with that think any less of you now?
No, I understand it. I completely understand it. If someone has that opinion, I understand it. But it doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me. It's not something that I worry about or concern myself with, and I'm quite happy for people to have their own opinions about me and what I've done. Like I said a bit earlier, I'm not claiming any authority, any sort of like special truth to my observations. They're my observations. They're my take on things, and it's fine. It really is fine. It's not a problem.
That's the key to it. You mentioned there is like, there's not a lot that bothers me anymore. There's very little that bothers me anymore, and there's a lot that I know, things that I know about, and I think would have bothered me emotionally a great deal in the past. And the difference between me in the past and me now, and it sounds like it's very much the same for you, is that it's that understanding. It's that it's especially where people's opinions come in. Like, okay, I understand whether, especially when it's only opinions about me, I understand where they may think that. I understand where that opinion is coming from, or an opinion about X, Y, Z other thing, climate change, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, Trump, Elon. Okay, I understand where they're coming from, and I think when you make an effort to try and understand where those opinions are coming from, what place, what has caused that person to think that thing, what information they're exposed to, what's their background, what the all these, a lot of it are hypothetical. You have to try and think about. There's obvious things that you can work out. So as you understand something, it makes it much. You can empathize somewhat, even with people who've done abhorrent things. You can empathize somewhat. It doesn't mean what you think it did was right or what they think is right, but it does mean that it lessens the emotional burden on yourself.
Yeah, and there is a difference between attacking someone's opinions and attacking the person. Like, there's a difference in that, isn't there?
Oh, these days they conflate the two.
Yeah, but
Goodness
as in
me. How dare you think the thing that I think, all my people think? You shouldn't think otherwise. Get out of the tribe. You're ostracized. Get out of the group.
Yeah.
Get out of the company. You lost your job. You lost your living. You lost your platform. You know how it goes.
Yeah. I mean, quite often what happens is I'll have a discussion with someone, quite often private, or sometimes in public, but often in private, and there'll be a controversy. Like there'll be a disagreement or not seeing something from the same perspective, and then afterwards, you can once you stopped presenting your version of events, once you stop presenting your opinion, your take on things, your perspective, you know, all those different things, and you can start to listen to the other persons, then you can start to take that in, and that sometimes doesn't happen immediately, you know, and that's fine. That's just normal, isn't it? You know, like that there has to be a point where you fervently or you strongly or you on the sort of like balance of it, you know, different variants of strength, believe something or think that something happened or remember something a certain way, and then there's a point where maybe you hear a different perspective, a different version of events, a different description of what happened, and sometimes that takes time to sort of assimilate in and sort of like sort of merge with your own, and actually, and then that gives you a new insight into that. But we can spend far too much time trying to gain insight into things that are long gone, whilst the real world is live, you know, live action. um
Yeah, but I don't think you can ever ever overanalyze the past.
um it's not something I do a lot of.
No, I'm not saying. No, I'm not saying. No, I'm not saying everyone should do it. I'm saying I don't think you can ever overanalyze the past. You know, because as we move forward, we being people, humans, individuals, we gain more understanding of the world around us and the way things work, and it allows us to look at things in the past differently. Right? We were looking at, you know, we were looking at um, like we were looking at pre-World War II Germany
Mm.
in 1938. In 1945, we were looking at pre-war Germany in a different way to what we look at pre-war Germany now compared to then. Just as an example,
Yeah.
you know.
But I think that we don't need to, you know, like we can live our lives without any constantly referencing the past. We can do that, and we don't need to be constrained and controlled by the
How do you think
past. You
that's
know,
going wrong now? Then I'm not sure I agree with you. So, give me an example of how that's a bad thing at the moment by not referencing the past,
no,
by referencing the past too much, maybe.
no, I think personally,
Okay. Okay. Okay.
yeah. So lots of people get stuck in that, don't they? Where they're stuck in the past. You know, like it,
On the identity level, yeah, they make their identity everything that they once were. Military is a classic
yeah,
example.
but also maybe going over and over events that happened, trying to make sense of them,
Mm.
right? Um, and sometimes there isn't a sense to find.
Hmm.
You know, there isn't an explanation. You know, there isn't an explanation. So either trying to fill in the story, you know, like if only I knew a bit more about what happened, or try and put this together, work it out, or well, that happened in the past, so I need to be really careful, you know, or I won't do this again. You know, like how the past we can allow it to control our present, um, and we don't need to do that. It's not necessary. People can spend as much time and energy as they want doing that, but it don't need to. We can get caught up in the past.
Yeah, totally agree on an individual level. Yeah. All right, we've got one more question. It is a hypothetical, but I'm going to use it to highlight a point actually. So all right, actually three more questions, but the other two are a little bit easier. All right, the IDF, as in the Israeli Defense Force, are reported to be using or have used Palestinian civilians as human shields, forcing them to search tunnels for bombs, etc. And then there's a couple of hypothetical questions. If your unit had come across it, if Parej come across it, would we intervene to stop it? And, but it brings me on to not an interesting point, a point which may be of interest to Coke or anyone else is listening, right? With the reality of the reality of the law of armed conflict. I think when you're fighting with an enemy which isn't governed by the law of armed conflict, there's an example. My a great example of this is the battalion of Germans in fighting the legionnaires. What's it called? The Devil's Guard. Remember the Devil's Guard? You ever read the book?
That was set in Vietnam. I'm not sure exactly the historical.
Pre-Vietnam. No, but it's relatively accurate apparently. I was a follow up.
Yeah.
Anyway, relatively accurate. There's a story in there. I won't go into details about this. It was a German battalion fighting for the French, wasn't it?
Yeah.
For the French, yeah. And it was
Vietnam.
Not long after the Second World War, a bunch of Germans, Nazis, had fled across to France, and they claimed they were farmers, and they would get into the Legion, and they all joined up the Legion. They got put into this German battalion, and there's a very famous book written called The Devil's Guard, which is a journalist traveling through the area after the war, and happens to meet the CO of this unit, and the CO basically tells him his stories. And the German unit used to get given all of the, because the French knew that they weren't farmers, they were blatantly Nazis, and they would get given the missions that were a nightmare to do, like suicide missions or whatever, that they didn't want to waste throwing French lives out. And there's an example in there of there's a French unit, I think the French unit, a company of guys who are stranded somewhere in Vietnam. They're cut off, they're under siege, and they haven't been gotten to for weeks. And every French unit convoy tries to get to this French company of men. They just get slaughtered on the way. The only way to get there is down this like main supply route, a road, basically through the jungle. There's no other way to get there. And in the end, they turn to the Germans and say, "You go." And the Germans go through, and they get to the first village on the route through towards this company of men, this stranded French company, and they get to the first village, and at the start of the village, they get the villagers, and they strap a load of the villagers to the vehicles, to the trucks, and they've got loudspeakers, and they drive through the jungle. As they're driving through the jungle with these villagers strapped to the wagons, they're saying on the tannoy, on the speakers, basically to anyone who's listening, "Don't attack us. If you attack us, if you try and shoot us, if you try and blow us up, you're going to be blowing your own people up because we strapped you villagers to the trucks." And they're the only convoy that made it through to the French, and they rescued the French. That's one example. And
I'm not 100% sure if any of that's true, but anyway,
I'm inclined to believe it. I'm inclined to believe it because it's a tactic that would work in extremists.
Along with the Sven Hassel books that were very popular in the parachute regiment.
Sven Hassel
Legion
books?
of the Damned.
I've not read this.
This is some guy who claims to have fought on the Eastern Front. I think he was Danish.
But either way, the point I was going to make. So let's say, no, oh my God, this is devil's advocate here, not devil's advocate. The IDF reportedly using Palestinian civilians as human shields, forcing them to search tunnels for bombs, etc. Absolutely does not surprise me whatsoever. I had never done it. I wouldn't do it. However, there is a reality that where you are an organized force with rules and governance in place, fighting a force that doesn't have those same rules and governance. We mentioned this earlier, talking about the Taliban. They are willing to do things that you will to not. And what the IDF are doing here is an example of a real bad way, but maybe the only way or the most risk-averse way for them to achieve the aim of clearing the tunnels. Get the Palestinians to do it. It's the reality of it. I know, fucking crazy what's going on there. Crazy what happens in all the wars, to be honest. But anyway, okay. Last one. How did you learn to deal with your PTSD and other mental health challenges? What advice would you give someone who's experiencing or was experienced the same as what you did?
That is difficult, and that's very difficult because you could do more harm than good by giving advice to anyone about this stuff. You know, I think these things are it's possible that these things manifest very differently in people, and that the way um, of living with these things might be different for different people. And so to sort of like advocate a course of action, um,
You can communicate your experience, though.
yeah, but I wouldn't want to. I really think you can be. You need there needs to be some care with that.
Yeah.
I understand, like, and it's not the case of sort of like withholding information or having a lack of empathy for someone who's going through that. But these things can be so complex. They really can. Because for example, for years I managed a lot of it with alcohol, and at least one professional, experienced professional, told me that I should carry on doing that.
Carry on.
Yep.
No.
Yep.
A GP.
No, someone experienced in PTSD psychology, like a psychologist.
Yeah. Jesus.
Because his opinion was that, and he had extensive experience working with veterans with PTSD, that sometimes it was a good holding, like that you wouldn't, if you came off the booze, you wouldn't be able to cope because the booze deadens things. And so I, at the same time, I was also advised by another medical professional with extensive PTSD experience that I had to give up drinking. So straight away, there's two professionals, and
The first guy's a moron. First guy's a moron.
I can honestly say that they were very close together in terms of those advice. I had other. I saw a psychiatrist once who was trying to prescribe heavy duty medication. That I never went down that route. Now, I never went down that route. I'm not saying that someone shouldn't. We all bundle through this. Like we stumble along through this, and some of us stumble through it and some of us don't, and it really is, there's no easy answer to it. It's like, how do you come to terms with this? That's one of the questions, isn't it? How do you adjust, like reorientate? And there's no easy answer, like there really isn't. I can say that at sometimes, all the campaigning I was doing, both in public and behind the scenes and the rest of it, probably was helpful. And at other times, that campaigning was keeping me in there, that sometimes alcohol was pretty useful, for deadening off some pretty extreme feelings, I suppose, like sensations. And sometimes it probably prolonged things and made things worse. It's so, I know it's a crap answer, but I can't really say, like I mean, what's your take?
No, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. My advice is always, if you've not sought help yet, or you've not spoken to anyone about whatever, if you think you've got PTSD, you think you've got mental illness and mental ill health, and the first thing to do is go and tell someone. And maybe you don't know who to tell. Maybe you don't want to tell friends. You don't want to tell family. Maybe you don't want to tell your GP. You go and tell someone neutral, anyone. For myself, that was walking into a Health Hero Centre and telling someone neutral, and that was the start. I mean, I waited way too long to do it, but that was the start of my journey to recovery. And then for other people who are maybe, because there's people who are, they've done that. They've been through some processes. Maybe they've had some, a bunch of a series of like psychological treatment or psychiatrist treatment. What do you call it? Cognitive behavioral therapy, or maybe they've had the What's the
EDM, is it?
EDM?
Something to do with the eye movement.
EDM, yeah, EDM, rapid eye, yeah, EDM.
I'm not sure the exact name.
That and nothing's working. Then you go and try somewhere else. There are solutions out there for people. It's just it can take time to find the right one, the right team, the right person, the right organization, and give it to you. What I will say is though, fucking alcohol. That guy's a moron. We talked about that. Maybe you don't think he's a moron. I think he's a moron. And one of the,
yeah,
I used alcohol a lot. I haven't drank now for about a year and a half, almost. And the problem with it is that it can. I think the problem with it is it can present symptoms which are maybe nothing to do with PTSD or whatever the thing is. Could be just because of the alcohol. It can. I mean, there's a whole host of reasons that alcohol is bad for you. But one of the things I would say to people is that, if you are not good in your head at the moment, I would not jump to conclusions about what it could be. If there's a bunch of bad habits in your life, from a lack of fizz, a lack of outdoors, a lack of good people in your life, too much putting nonsense in your body, be that alcohol, be that drugs, be that shit food, all this stuff contributes to your mental health and well-being, and you've, as well as seeking help, one of the first things you can do is absolutely self-help. Try and get more fresh air, try and eat a little bit better, and try and reduce whatever the bad thing you're putting in your body. It will absolutely help you going forward, and it'll make it a lot easier for any professional to do a diagnosis as well. So I would say, yeah, goodness me. Right. Is there anything we haven't covered that you wanted to cover? You didn't come in with a list at all. The subscribers came in with a list of stuff, mate, to put you right on your toes.
Yeah, I had no agenda to start with.
No, I know you didn't, mate.
No, I didn't come in with any.
No, I know, and that's what makes me all the more grateful for you giving me your time. You come in here, you don't do this anymore. And you've gone through some pretty difficult questions today. But it's been a good conversation as always, dude.
Yeah.
I'm glad to see you chilled. Glad to see you happy. Glad to see retirement's going well. Maybe we do it again. Right, you're a legend.
I'm not falling into that trap. Yeah.
Mate, thanks for putting yourself through it. I really appreciate it, mate. Mate. Oh, hang on. Would you go on? There's one more question. Would you go on any other podcasts now you've done mine? You coming out of retirement?
No, that's it.
No, that's it.
Yeah. It was an obligation, a long-standing obligation that I feel that I've fulfilled.
Cheers, Ben. It's been a
Cheers,
pleasure.
man.
Good luck with everything, mate.
Yeah, cool, man.